Welcome to Let the Quran Speak. I'm Sophia, your host. We continue our series called How Will I Know? Last week, Dr. Shabir Ali and I explored how we can achieve certainty that Muhammad was the prophet of God. This week, we turn to the Quran. Muslims believe that the Quran is complete and untarnished. But how can we be sure? Is the Quran we have in our hands the same Quran revealed to the Prophet Muhammad more than 1400 years ago? Here's Dr. Shabir Ali now. Dr. Shabir Ali, welcome to Let the Quran Speak.
My pleasure to be on.
Now, how can we be sure? I mean, we talked about how we're certain in the previous episodes that the Prophet Muhammad was a messenger of God. He was a prophet. So now the question becomes, well, how can we be sure that the Quran came from the Prophet Muhammad is the same Quran that we have today?
Mm-hmm. So let me start with the story of the revelation of the Quran, because I don't know if we've done that in detail in this episode.
I don't believe so, no.
So the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was born in Mecca in Saudi Arabia, which is now Saudi Arabia, some 1400 years ago, in the year 570 of our common era. And then when he was about 40 years old, he took a liking to meditation. He meditated in a cave until eventually an angel came to him and said, read. And he said, I do not know what to read. And the angel taught him what to read. Iqra bismi rabbika alladhi khalaq. Read in the name of your Lord who creates. And that is now in the 96th chapter of the Quran. The whole passage that was revealed to him on that occasion is the first 5 verses now of that chapter. So this is the story of how the revelation came to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. This was the first instance, and then over a period of 23 years until eventually his passing away from this world, he continued to receive bits and pieces from the angel of revelation, who is identified in Muslim theology as the angel Gabriel.
Mm-hmm. So we know that the revelation came in different ways. So he could have been sitting, lying down on many different occasions.
True.
So how did he convey that to other people? How did he convey those little bits of revelation that he was getting?
Sometimes the revelation came to him like on the spur of a moment. Mm-hmm. Somebody may come and ask him a question, and then he asks the person to wait, and the revelation comes to him, and he gives the answer right away. So in a variety of circumstances, he delivers that message. Often he would give public sermons, and in the public sermons he would recite some of that revelation. He led Muslims in prayer, and in the Muslim prayer, some of that same revelation, the Quranic passages, are recited. So this was promulgated and publicly proclaimed in a variety of ways during his lifetime. He also is reported to have taught his companions to memorize the passages and also to write them down. And the written pieces were collected only after the death of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, into the singular volume that we have now, the Quran.
So were people just like as they memorized them? Because I'm guessing that sometimes when the revelation came, there might have been just a few people there, a few of his companions. So were they spreading it around? Were they memorizing it and then sharing it with other people?
Yeah, there are many stories indicating that the companions of the Prophet, peace be upon him, were eager to receive the last bits of revelation that came to him, or the last bits of teachings that he issued. So they would talk to each other. If one person was busy in the market, another person was learning from the Prophet, peace be upon him, later on they would share their notes, and so on. So there's a continuous interaction within the community and the sharing of this knowledge and information.
Mm-hmm. Now, so who was writing it? Who was writing these down?
There is actually a variety of persons who are noted in Muslim literature. Some 52 persons have been counted by Muhammad Mustafa Azami in his book on studies in Hadith literature. So there are persons who are specifically designated by the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, to write down the revelation. It's also mentioned that when the Prophet, peace be upon him, traveled, he would take with him not only somebody who is able to read and write, but also the writing instruments, pen and ink. And in this way, the entire Quran was put down in writing, but on a variety of written pieces. Paper was invented in China, but it'll be a century after the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, for paper to become popular in Arabia. And the earliest Qurans were written down on parchment, which is made from animal skin. And that could be very expensive, and of course you would have to slaughter many animals to get that amount of skin to write a whole volume of the entire volume of a book.
So how do they bring all those parchments together to come up with the Quran then?
So initially it is mentioned that the Quran was written on varied materials, not necessarily parchment. That means in the lifetime of the Prophet, peace be upon him. It's later that it will be put into parchment. But initially they used flat stone. It is even mentioned like the bark of trees, for example. If you get a flat piece, you can use that as a writing surface. Now, a couple of years after the death of the Prophet, peace be upon him, or rather we should say within 2 years after his death, because we know this occurred during the lifetime of Abu Bakr, who reigned up until 2 years after the Prophet, peace be upon him, then he passed away. So one of the companions of the Prophet, a young man by the name of Zayd bin Thabit, was commissioned to go around and collect from every Muslim who had written pieces so that they could all be gathered together and rewritten onto pages and kept in one place. So that was kept in the care of Abu Bakr. And eventually, after his death, it was passed on to the next caliph, Omar. And after his death, which occurred suddenly, it was kept in the care of Hafsa, his daughter, and who happened to be the wife of the Prophet, peace be upon him, one of the mothers of the believers. May God be pleased with her. And eventually, Uthman, the third caliph, requested that copy from Hafsa, and from it had several copies made and sent to various parts of the Muslim empire.
Why was there confusion? It seemed at certain points that there might have been confusion about what should have been included in the Quran and what shouldn't have in that early period. So what was going on there?
This is a normal process. When things are delivered orally, some people are there on the scene, some people are not there. They share notes with each other. Somebody may have missed something. So the companion of the Prophet that we mentioned, Zayd bin Thabit, he had the mandate to go around and collect from anyone who had any written piece. So anyone who came forward with a written piece had to justify his writing by getting a witness as well. Like, it's not just one person saying, okay, I got this and this is from the Prophet, peace be upon him. But does he have a witness, somebody else to back him up and say, well, yeah, we need two witnesses to settle an issue. So it was in this way, through this process, that the Quran came to be collected together. There was one piece at the end of the 9th chapter of the Quran that consists of now 2 verses, 128 and 129, those 2 verses of Surah At-Tawbah, that was presented only by one person. But that one person was known among the Muslim community, it is said, to be very commended by the Prophet, peace be upon him, as though he himself stood in the place of 2 witnesses. One can think of a kind of a back projection here, justifying after the fact. But nonetheless, only that one passage was noted to have been presented only by one person in writing. But bear in mind that Zayd bin Thabit himself was a close companion of the Prophet, peace be upon him. So while they're demanding 2 witnesses, those are 2 witnesses in addition to Zayd bin Thabit. And moreover, this whole thing is being done in the most public manner possible. So when it is done under the aegis of Abu Bakr, for example, and he is known to be a close companion of the Prophet, peace be upon him as well, when everyone knows in the public that this is being done, everyone who has something will come forward. And if there were something questionable, somebody would object. So because it was done in such a public way, William Montgomery Watt, in his book Introduction to the Quran, which is a rewriting of the book that was done by his teacher Richard Bell, said that nothing that could have been, nothing that should have been included could have been left out. And nothing that was included that should have been left out. Did I say it the right way? So in other words, anything that is in the Quran is there because it had to be there. And anything that was left out because it had to be left out.
So why was there concern in Uthman's time, the Caliph Uthman, to codify the Quran? What was that about?
So it is reported that because the earliest copies of the Quran were written without what we call diacritical marks to distinguish between one letter and another. Nowadays, we would distinguish between several letters of the Quran that look alike by placing dots either above or below them. The number of dots and the position of the dots would distinguish between one letter and another. In the earliest copies of the Quran, the dots were not there. So some confusion can arise in that way. People can read things differently. They look at the passage and they might remember it differently. Sometimes people use a synonym because they remember the meaning of the verse, but the meaning could have been expressed in two different ways. Like, for example, with a substitute word. So there's a word, for example, suf in Arabic, which means wool, and ayhan also means wool. And there's a passage of the Quran that says that on the Day of Judgment, the mountains will be like carded wool, kalehn al-manfush. But it is reported that somebody read it as kasuf al-manfush, which is the same statement, basically, like carded wool, but a different word is used for wool in Arabic, ayhan in the one reading, and suf in the other. So when Uthman commissioned the copying of the Quran, that was so that the official copy that was prepared in the time of Abu Bakr radiallahu anh, and checked by so many companions of the Prophet, peace be upon him, would be sent out to various parts of the Muslim empire, so that when they each received that copy, they would make sure that their recitation of the Quran conforms to that archetype.
How would you respond to the criticisms of Western academics, Crone, for example, or Cook, who have said, well, we don't think that the Quran actually arose early, in the time of the Prophet. We don't have evidence of that.
Yeah, so this was stated at one time, but nowadays the academic scholars have had to back away from that claim because early manuscripts of the Quran have been discovered, in several parts of the world. The Islamic Research Center in Turkey has actually gathered and published many manuscripts from many different parts of the world, ancient manuscripts, and what they do is that they show you a photograph of the ancient manuscript page, and then they transcribe that page into modern looking Arabic text, and they make notes about any possible variations. And what they have shown is that texts from many different parts of the world, from Yemen down south in Arabia, and from Egypt, from many different parts of the ancient world. We have manuscripts from the early 2nd century of Islam that correspond with each other and correspond to our text as we have it today. Now, there are some differences that we should note. Sometimes there's a difference of an aleph, and that should be explained. In the English language, we don't write a double A together. That's done often in German, but not so much in English. We don't even write a double U together, except in the word, let's say, vacuum. We have two U's together. For A's, we might have the word aardvark. Somebody asked me, what is aardvark and anteater? All right, so you have AA together, but mostly A occurs by itself. Whether the A should be pronounced short, as in bat, or long, as in car. But in the Arabic language, if the A is to be pronounced long, then there is a symbol written in, and that's the symbol aleph, indicating that it's a long A. So in the earliest writing of the Quran, sometimes the long A was not written. So there is an Arabic word qala, which means he said, that's written with a long A. But in the earliest manuscripts of the Quran, it might have been written without the long A, so it looks like qul. And one might mistake it to think that it means kul, but only reading it in context, knowing the meaning, and of course having learned how to recite it from a teacher, one would know that it's recited with a long A. So eventually, scribes began to write in that long A so that there will be no confusion. So some of the manuscripts lacked that long A because that was the writing conventions of the day. People wanted to conserve and write as short as possible. But the proper writing of whether it should include the long A or not, this had to be known to the scholars in the field and eventually written down in the manuscripts that we have. So in short, when we compare those ancient manuscripts with what we are reciting now, we see that our recitation goes back to very early times of the Muslim Empire, and those manuscripts themselves date to the time of the companions of the Prophet, peace be upon him.
Well, it's good to know that there was such a rigorous approach taken to preserving the Quran. Thank you for your time, Dr. Shabir.
You're welcome.
Hey YouTube! Join me every week as Dr. Shabir Ali and I discuss controversial topics and talk to community leaders, artists, Muslim professionals, and more importantly, answer questions from you, our viewers. Subscribe for new uploads every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday.